Good evening, welcome. Tonight's program is sponsored by the College Scholars. This program provides a stipend for JCCC faculty, both full and part-time, to develop their research interests. There are two presentations, an evening one and a morning one during school hours, and also either a faculty seminar or a lecture at another faculty's classroom. The College Scholars program, which was started by Jim Leiker, who is in the back of the room there, I think is important for several reasons. First and foremost, it allows community college faculty to pursue academic interests, which is sometimes hard to do because, of course, community faculty, our main focus is teaching. But I think pursuing academic interests enriches our teaching because it allows us to bring new ideas and fresh perspectives to the classroom, which benefits the students. And then finally, I think this is a great opportunity for JCCC faculty and for the larger community to interact. At all of these evening sessions especially, there's always people from the community who are engaged and ask great questions, and we can have a dialogue back and forth of those two groups. And so now on to tonight's speaker. It is with great pleasure that I introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Douglas Harvey. Dr. Harvey has been teaching at JCCC since 2005. Over the course of his 20-year career, he has also taught at just about every respected institution of higher learning in the area, including Fort Hays University, KU, Washburn University, UMKC, and Emporia State. He currently holds a full-time position at Metropolitan Community College, Blue River. I have observed Dr. Harvey teach several times, and I can therefore state with firsthand experience that he is an excellent professor. I think we have some of his students in the audience who will probably also attest to that. He challenges his students to see history in new ways and with fresh eyes. He received his PhD from Kansas University in 2008. His work as a historian has focused on how disfranchised groups related to and resisted the enterprises of the elite classes. His dissertation topic, which he later revised and published as a book entitled The Theater of Empire, Frontier Performances in North America, 1760 to 1860, examines the ways in which both English settlers and Native Americans used performance arts, such as plays, songs, minstrel shows, and animal acts, to either expand the reach of white culture or resist that expansion. Dr. Harvey has also studied the history of conservation and wildlife in Kansas, particularly as it relates to the Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Refuge. His latest project, which I think is wicked cool, is a collaboration with a local graphic artist, and it is a graphic novel of the Whiskey Rebellion, a 1791 revolt in Pennsylvania against attacks on whiskey. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Doug Harvey.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. After that introduction, I want to hear this guy talk too. Yes, I want to repeat what Sarah said about the College Scholar Program. Doing research can be kind of a lonely activity, solitary activity, and to be able to share it with the community is a wonderful thing, and so I very much appreciate getting to do that. And I appreciate JCCC given the opportunity to help subsidize these things. And along those lines, I want to take a moment and thank Sarah and Jim Leiker for encouraging me to pursue this College Scholar Award. And I especially want to give a shout out to Vin Clark, the former chair of the history department, without whose efforts a lot of this would not have happened. So I very much appreciate all the help and support I've gotten here at JCCC. The religion and the American Revolution. One thing that this is not going to be is a discussion of how much the United States was founded as a Christian nation. For that discussion, that's not really a scholarly discussion. I just refer people to the First Amendment, where it says we will establish no religion. So that's not what this is. But what I want to look at through the eyes of Herman Husband is what role religion did play in the American Revolution. And I hope, because there's a lot to be said about Herman Husband, I hope that I've organized this talk tonight enough to get inside Herman's head, and because I think it's he's a case study for how religion affected a lot of the rank and file farmers in the Revolutionary period. And so that's really what we're getting at here. The many rebellions of Herman Husband, we don't have time to do all the many rebellions of him tonight, but I'll just mention kind of a laundry list of what they were. First of all, he rebelled against the Anglican Church as a young man, became a Quaker. We're going to go into this a little more, and was something of a preacher in his own right, as well as an entrepreneur and a farmer. And his radicalism, his religious and political radicalism reached a point where not even the Quakers wanted him, so they disowned him, and he had to go preach on his own, which he had a following. So that was one rebellion, and then he went to North Carolina, and this is what our main topic tonight was in colonial North Carolina, 1760s, 70s. He got involved in the regulation, it's called, and so we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. But then when that was over, he had to leave North Carolina in fear of his life. He changed his name to Tuscape Death, spelled T-U-S-C-A-P-E, and actually filed for some lands in Pennsylvania under that name. If you go look in the land office in Pennsylvania, there's lands registered to Tuscape Death. And so he reestablished himself up there, and near the end of the Revolution, the American Revolution, the early 80s, 1780s, he spoke out. He was a pamphlet writer, and he wrote a pamphlet. He published these pamphlets himself, and this particular pamphlet, 1782, is called Proposal to Amend, and he wanted to amend the Second Continental Congress, and he had some interesting ideas about how to tax without being a burden. These are things that I'm not going into great detail tonight, but some of it I'll get into next week during the day talk. And so he spoke out with ideas about how the new government should be operated. And then with the movement to create a constitution in 1787-88, Herman was an anti-federalist. He opposed the Constitution. He thought it was too much power in one place. He thought it was controlled by elitists, the wealthy. He thought it was a power play, and he spoke out against that. And then, once that was adopted, he had served in the state legislature of Pennsylvania for a while as well. Once that was adopted, and the new government established a tax. It was called a tax on spirits, a whiskey tax. He spoke out against that, and indeed he led a rebellion against that, was one of the leaders of a rebellion against the whiskey tax, called the Whiskey Rebellion, or a more sympathetic name for it is the Pennsylvania Regulation. The Whiskey Rebellion is kind of a rhetoric that makes it sound like it's just a bunch of crazy whiskey drinking yahoos out in the hills, right? So the Pennsylvania Regulation. So those are kind of the mini rebellions that we don't have time to go into all that. Keep an eye out for the book. But if you Google images for Herman Husband, this is what you'll get. I have no idea the provenance of this. I don't know that I really like it. But that's somebody's rendition, perhaps a descendant. There's a lot of descendants out there, and as an aside, one of the descendants was a guy named Husband Kimmel, that some of you may notice that name, associated with Pearl Harbor, and commander of forces in Hawaii. The guy that was often blamed for being asleep at the switch in Pearl Harbor was a descendant of Herman Husbands. No, I like this picture. This is our graphic novel that Sarah mentioned. And the artist, Michael Lee Herron, is son of sociology prof Stu Schaefer. But there's Herman up there. I think that's a much more Herman-looking Herman than the other guy. So that's the one. That's the one I like. Keep an eye out for that too. That's actually at the publishers right now. At least part one of it is at the publishers. A little background on Herman. First, a little background on my approach to this. I'm going to be talking about religion and the way I approach studying religion. I'm not a religion scholar. I'm more of a cultural historian, really, and I approach this really from the psychology of religion point of view. I'm a secularist in that regard, but sympathetic and fully acknowledge that religion is a valid pursuit and that people, it plays an important role for a lot of people. Certainly it did for Herman and a lot of his neighbors and followers. Herman Husband was born in 1724 in Cecil County, Maryland. Cecil County is up in the corner of the state at the upper reaches of Chesapeake Bay. While I have this map out here, here's the Susquehanna River, major artery here. This little river here is called the Octoraro River. It's not very long. That's where Herman bought his first land, was in this area. I just wanted to show you while I had the map up here. He was the grandson of an indentured servant named William Husband, who came from County Kent. We're not sure exactly the year, but by 1688, he was a clerk working for the colonial government of Maryland, and recorded some notes about how during the Glorious Revolution of 1688, made some notes about how the Maryland government intends to stay loyal to the crown. That was the grandfather. The father was William the Younger, who began to acquire various land holdings in Maryland. And by the time Herman was born, he was born into a very comfortable environment, economically, kind of middling social environment, middling plantation. They weren't great planters. I think his father had 5 to 10 slaves, something like that, an iron works, lumber mill, grist mill, kind of a not unusual, very kind of common phenomenon in Chesapeake Valley or drainage. And Herman's early religious life. In 1750, at the age of 26, Herman began to write down and ended up publishing a pamphlet called Some Remarks on Religion. And he felt that so many people he had wanted to tell about his early religious experiences, but he was afraid of scaring people off because they were kind of profound. And it's kind of like, makes me think of, when I think about it, if you see a UFO, should you tell someone? I mean, that's kind of how he makes it sound in his remarks. And he finally decided to write it down, and luckily the text survives. And he started having these powerful religious experiences as early as the ages of 8 and 9 years old. And he called this inner tormentor, or his conscience, he called it the reprover. And the thing that he struggled with mightily for a number of years was he would do things that seemingly most young boys would do, but he would feel terribly guilty about it. And he would go into these extended depressions, things like playing cards or wrestling or just kind of everyday stuff in colonial Maryland society. The reprover would condemn him, and he was not able to enjoy himself really because of this thing that went on, like I say, for years. And then, remember, he's born in 1724. 1739 was one of the years of George Whitefield's big tour of the colonies. George Whitefield was a huge figure he's kind of the rock star of the Great Awakening, so-called religious revival movement in England and the colonies. And so he and his family, Herman and his family at age 15 traveled to Northeast, to Gilbert Tennant's church in Maryland to hear George Whitefield. And this had a profound effect on Herman because these sermons were very enthusiastic, was the word they used at the time. We would use the term hellfire and brimstone. And the idea was to kind of, I guess the effect it had on a lot of people was to make them feel condemned, to where they would seek being saved in some way. And there are a number of incidents of, it's a fairly well documented phenomenon, which brings me to the psychology of this and the way I approach it, thinking about religious experiences in the 18th century here, mid-18th century. The Great Awakening, this religious revival on a micro level, individuals would have, like I say, this sense of being condemned. And this might go on for a few hours, it might go on for a few days, it might go on for years. And in Herman's case, it went on for some years. Jonathan Edwards, a famous preacher from Connecticut during the Great Awakening, his father went into one of these depressions and never made it out the other side. He hanged himself. So it's a very real, very profound experience. It's not just like being saved. It's an actual psychological transformation that a lot of people went through, including Herman. So on the macro level, once you've had an experience like this, you're kind of down in the depths. You think you're condemned. You think that all is lost. You're going to go to hell. There's no hope. And then, at some point, there's this moment where a ray of light shines in. And you get this, you start doubting that, well, maybe I'm not going to hell. And the ray of light expands, and sometimes in some people's testimony, they're flooded with light, they see a bright light, all different forms that this takes. And they are, quote unquote, saved. So once you've had that experience, and this is getting at the macro, once you've had that experience, you kind of feel that when it comes to matters of governance, that maybe you should have a say in how governance happens. You've had this profound, life-changing experience with the divine. Shouldn't you have a say in what happens? And so this is really the nature of the religious influence on not only the American Revolution, but other similar, in spirit, I guess, kind of events. So maybe we can work that over a little bit later. And this is a very real thing to Herman. And that's one of the things I'm doing in my work here, is that other people who have written about Herman Husband have not done, and that is take him seriously. And but this is a very real thing for him. Other names he gave to the reprover: the Spirit of Christ, the light of nature, the relic of God's image left in man from the Garden of Eden. So this was something that he, this was very real to him. So after all of that, he went through that kind of experience for a number of years, and he talks about it in some remarks on religion, how he would have this sense of being saved, but then he'd go into another depression. And in our culture, we'd just give him some Zoloft or something, right? It would be very different the way we would respond to him. So, so he got frustrated with the Anglican. He felt it was they're not even paying attention to what's going on in the inner life. He got very frustrated with that. So when he reached his majority, he waited until he reached his majority to convert to Quakerism. He didn't want to alienate his father, at least that's what we think. He didn't actually say that, but he did inherit a bunch of his father's land, and his little brother, who had converted earlier, didn't inherit any of his father's land. So, so he converted to Quakerism, got married around 1745, and took over the family's iron works in Baltimore County. He made his first purchase of land, 30 acres in the Octoraro Valley, 1754, and was growing his own enterprise, not unlike his father's. Although Herman, there's no evidence, strong evidence, that he ever owned slaves, and he certainly was outspoken against it. Although the Quakers, well, there's our map again. Octoraro Valley, in case you missed it the first time. The Quakers did participate in the slave trade and slavery for a while. They did reject it eventually. He bought into a 45-ton schooner called the Charlestown, which was built in Cecil County, which plied the waters of the Caribbean, possibly involved in some slave trade, we don't know. Herman traveled to Barbados, and I didn't know there was a Quaker meeting in Barbados at Bridgetown, but there was, and that's how we know he was there, as the Quakers keep pretty good records. And on the way, passed through North Carolina, going and coming, and learned how inexpensive land was in the Piedmont of North Carolina. North Carolina was kind of a colonial backwater. It was kind of the last of the original 13 to be settled, and so there were a number of maroon towns and outlaws and Indian refugees and whatnot there. So this is the North Carolina part of the story. Fall of 1754, Herman returned to North Carolina as a land agent for actually 10 potential land buyers. They organized in Maryland and sent him to buy them each some land. And he went to the Granville district. When Carolina was founded as a colony, it was a land grant from Charles II to 8 aristocrats. 7 of the aristocrats bailed out fairly soon. Earl of Granville hung on all the way up to the American Revolution, really. And this was the Granville district, roughly. Note Edenton over there, that was the colonial capital of North Carolina. And I've got another map, but while I've got this out here, I just want to show, this is the area where Herman started looking and buying land. This is pretty close to what we call today the Research Triangle, Chapel Hill and Raleigh and Asheboro and that area, the Piedmont it was called. Orange County is where Herman went to buy land. Orange County today is much smaller than this, but it was divided up later. Rowan County, just as an aside, this is Daniel Boone's territory, if anyone is interested. And so he was sent to purchase 1,000-acre tracts for each member of the association. Remember, the land's pretty cheap. And he made some notes about what he saw in North Carolina. And this is, I'm trying to use, at least in part, some of Herman's language. 3 types of settlers, the idle and poor. These were individuals that were kind of left from the backwater days when they were often men on the run, particularly those maroon towns, escaped slaves, Indian refugees. They'd kind of moved on further west at that point. What he called rogues. These were office seekers, people looking for profitable posts. In the colonial period, for example, it was fairly common to seek a job as a tax farmer. Taxes were often collected by tax farmers. And tax farmers were people that were hired. You didn't have to pay them. You get a percentage of however many taxes you collect. And so, any opportunity for shenanigans there, you think? As we'll see, yes. And then squatters. Squatters were people who, not unlike Herman, although Herman had some resources. Remember, he came from middling wealth. Squatters were people who had come, maybe sold everything to get there, left Virginia, left Maryland, left southeast Pennsylvania, which was starting to fill up, and would squat on a particular property with the idea of producing enough wealth off that property to actually buy the land. This was pretty common, really, in the colonial period, and individuals would do that with the expectation that their squatting and production and purchase of land would be honored. And it usually was in most colonies, at least for a while. What they would do then, these squatters, produce some crops, maybe harvest some timber, and get enough money to buy a survey. You have to hire a surveyor to survey the land and send them with the purchase money for the land off to Edenton, 200 miles away, and trust them that they're going to come back with a land title. So that's the situation as Herman sees it. And frankly, well, I'll get to that in a second. So the surveyors were a key element here, and there were 2 main ones in Granville District in this area of Orange County. James Carter and William Churton. If you go to Hillsborough, Orange County, in that area, there are things named after William Churton. They remember him pretty well. James Carter, on the other hand, had a reputation for shady behavior. It turns out he had been in a debtor's prison in Maryland. He had been bought out of the debtor's prison, and then he ran off from the person that bought him, who then owned him, basically, and he would have to work off the debt. So he took off, went to North Carolina, and found his way in the world there. Became a justice of the peace and register of deeds in Rowan County, deputy surveyor, assemblyman, trustee for the town of Salisbury, landowner with indentured servants and slaves, much respected and very wealthy. Well, I don't know about respected, very wealthy, as we'll see here. Farmers who hired him waited years to get their deed and often did not get them at all. When Herman was there looking at these lands, thinking, okay, I'll buy 10,000 acres of land for our little consortium, and maybe we can make some money on it. When farmers complained to Carter, he would blame the land office in Edenton. And what it turned out what was happening, Herman went to Edenton to check it out. And what he found there is that only 1 in 170 cases had returned a deed. So out of 170 farmers who send their money to Edenton with James Carter, only one get their deed for their land. Carter pocketed the money. That's not nice. And so that is, as it turns out, as Herman starts discovering the Piedmont of North Carolina, that's one of the big problems. Another big problem, Herman moved, and this is kind of Herman's scheme, is, and he plainly says this in his writings that he left behind, the situation is risky, that's why the land's cheap. So if we can come here, buy a bunch of land, and then take steps to make it less risky, the land price will go up. And that was kind of his modus operandi. So he came to this area. This is another little map of Orange County, of the Piedmont. You can kind of get a little more oriented here. Liberty, which is a little bitty town. Are there 500 people in Liberty? I doubt it. It's pretty small. But it's near Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and over here Raleigh, of course. And a map without Chapel Hill is a bit hard to fathom, but there it is. So that's where he came to, and he bought his land at first in this area, but he bought more around Orange County. According to my newfound friends in North Carolina, a guy named Mac Watley and another guy, Warren Dixon, who are local historians in this area, they sent me out here and said, this is the area where Herman's homestead was. Most of these trees were not there then. It's not unlike eastern Kansas. The trees were burned off, but this is kind of what it looks like there. Lots of corn growing. And actually, I'm told, Herman built this road. And at one point, this road went all the way to Hillsboro, which is about 30 miles, although the state highway has usurped most of that now. But that's a road that Herman built. And so once he was living there and he brought his family, he was on, at this point, he was on his second wife. First wife had died. He had 3 total. The first 2 died. He began to complain in his writing of courthouse rings. So this is the other problem he was reckoning with in the Piedmont. And he lays out the conditions, the causes, the solution. That's what he calls them. The conditions are taxes, fees unfairly burden the poor. And I should explain that a little bit. Taxes and fees unfairly burden the poor. If you had to go to the courthouse and pay your property tax in Orange County at Hillsboro, it was very common for a local lawyer or clerk to tell you, okay, you want to register your property tax is 50, 20 shillings, whatever. That'll cost you £2. Well, £2 in 1760, that's a lot of money for these farmers. It's a little bit like, and I tell my students this, it's a little bit like if you were to go in and get tags for your car and you're expecting to pay $150 or something. You go in to get tags for your car and the clerk at the window says, that'll be $3,000. What? $3,000? It's $150. No, it's $3,000. I mean, if you want tags for your car. Well, I got to have them for work. I don't know what to say, but it's $3,000. Tell you what I'll do. If you come out to my place and work 3 days a week for a year, I'll cover it for you. So you don't have any choice. You got 5 kids to feed. You got to have your car. You get out to his place on Saturday afternoon, and lo and behold, there's 10 other people out there working. So it's a nice little racket. Take them to court, courts are in on it. That's why they're called courthouse rings. And these courthouse rings are a phenomenon, really, of the frontier. If you read early Kansas, territorial Kansas, you'll read about courthouse rings here too. And lawyers manipulating themselves in positions above the law so they could have it their way and basically abuse the citizens and live off them in that way. So that's when Herman says rogues, that's who he's talking about. People being enslaved by fees. So that's the second thing. Third thing, religion. The Anglican Church is being forced on people. There was a tithe tax. People were forced to pay a tithe tax. The Anglican Church was the official state religion, which is one reason why we have the First Amendment, so you can't establish an official state religion. Then the causes of all of this. And Herman was pretty big on this. The problem is people are not exercising their rights as citizens. That's the whole issue here. If they would just stand up to these people and insist on having their rights as English citizens being honored, we wouldn't be in this mess. And but letting these idle placemen, as the language of the day, make their decisions for them, and governors turning into usurpers. I just selected a few lines out of his writing. People do not assert their liberty properly, meaning they don't assert themselves, period, really. And so that's his main complaint. And what we need to do about it, he said, is we need people who are new lights, that are in touch with this spirit of the divine within themselves, that are willing to stand up to these these rogues that run the courthouse rings and people like James Carter. Not men who, and again I'm just selecting some and paraphrasing some text from his writing, not men who rule by wealth and corrupt and cheat their fellow man. Say to them, he said, your money perish with you. Men who easily sell their souls will sell their country. And this is where we start getting into Herman's overlap with Republican virtue, or another way to put this is radical Whig ideology. There's the English country radicals of this period who had written extensively about how to assert your rights, what people should do to be a free people. And Herman had read their writings. And so there's this overlap of Whig ideology, radical Whig ideology, with religious belief. You need to tell your candidates and representatives what you want them to do, and don't be shy. So, and he was big on this. He repeats this numerous times. Beware of the art of flattery. People who will make you think that they're a great good person, but while they're doing that, they make us slaves by our own consent. And so these farmers, as you can see, were in a bad situation. And so they began to try to regulate this behavior, and that's where we get the term regulation, obviously. And he was one of the leaders. He wrote extensively about it. And it turned into a struggle that lasted 6 years, and summarized by Husband in his Impartial Relation of 1770. the regulation wasn't over until 1771, so this was published before it was over. And I'll pull it up here when we get through this. And it was published in a number of different contexts. It's also called a Fan for Fanning, which was aimed at Sheriff Edward Fanning. At one point, the regulators were so frustrated, they raided a courthouse during a trial, pistol whipped the judge, who was actually one of the financiers of Daniel Boone's trip to Kentucky, and pulled Edward Fanning's house down to the ground. This is the height of the riots of the regulation. Part of this, at the end of an impartial relation, was published as a pamphlet called "Shew Yourselves to be Freemen." And here's where I want to quote a little bit, because hearing Herman's words, I think you get the idea of the bottom line of what we're addressing here. This is from an impartial relation. Beware of being corrupted by flattery, for such men study the art of managing those springs of action within us, and will easily make us slaves by our own consent. There is more passions than one that these men work upon. There is drunkenness, love of honor, flattery of great men, love of interest, preferment, or some worldly advantage. They, by taking hold of these springs within us, insensibly lead us into bondage. And another passage, the first slavery that men are generally brought under is that of the mind. For while the mind acts freely and is kept clear of the chains of ignorance and prejudice, it would be very difficult to enslave them. It therefore requires the aid of false teachers to seduce mankind before a state can deprive them of their civil liberties and privileges. It is a most certain fact, though not often noticed, that the blending of civil and religious offices, and this is a very interesting piece here, as religious as he was, remember he's a preacher, but he insists on separation of church and state. Where was I? It is a most certain fact, though not often noticed, that the blending of civil and religious offices, sacred and secular things, has been an introduction to slavery in all nations where arbitrary government has been introduced. When ministers assume the province of a magistrate to make laws and punish dissenters, they become lords over the people in a double respect. Then men will not dare to express the truth, because of a double danger of being heartily cursed by the priest and severely punished by the magistrate. The mind, being thus cramped in her operations, turns servile in her affections. The consequence is ignorance and bondage. So that's Herman husband right there. And this idea that we should trust the new lights, this idea of the divine, to people who have been in touch with the divine within themselves, to lead the way. And one more thing on that note is that what he was really trying to do, and he didn't say it this way, I'm going to try and say it this way. He believed that the true scripture, and he does say this, the true scripture is written in the human heart. And what we want to do is take the relationship between the individual and their own conscience and somehow have that be the seat of power. That was his vision. And he was trying to articulate it and relate it to his fellows. Not an easy thing. And not only that, but power doesn't like it when you say things like that. So the Whiskey Rebellion, which I'm going to talk about next week, the Whiskey Rebellion in the 1790s, out of some 8,000 to 10,000 men who rose up against this, what they saw as an obnoxious tax, illegal tax, they felt. He was one of 5 who were arrested out of several thousand, because he said stuff like that. So, trying to see how I'm doing on time here. I should finish up North Carolina. Battle of Alamance, May 16, 1771. These farmers who were trying to regulate the courthouse rings, the governor, a guy named William Tryon, a military man, led a North Carolina militia out to Orange County near a little town called Alamance. It's in Alamance County today. And to put down this regulation. The regulators were out there. There were about 2,000 of them. They were well armed, but they weren't planning on a fight. They were just out there kind of making a show, having a few drinks, doing, standing up to some extent. They thought there was going to be some kind of negotiation. But when the militia got there, they opened fire. And so the regulators were shocked by that. A number of them were killed, and so they returned fire, and there was a battle. A number of men on both sides were killed. It happened in this field, which is well remembered in Piedmont, North Carolina. The red flags represent where the British were, but it isn't actually the British. It's the North Carolina militia, and this is a little extra added historical interpretation bonus for you. If you were standing where the red flags are and you look across the draw, there's this, the regulators were on the other side. Those trees weren't there. And so it's across this little draw here where the fight happened. The regulators were driven off. Several of them were arrested. One of them was hanged on the spot. 6 of them were put in jail in Hillsborough and hanged at this spot about a month later. And this is the spot. Merrill, Messer, Matter, Pugh, and 2 other regulators were hanged there. And they put wreaths on it every year. And there's a couple of monuments at the Battle of Alamance site. There's a visitor's center as well. I'll show you a little video when you get there. This was, you can see, first battle of the Revolution. But bear in mind, this is between the regulators who were struggling with the courthouse rings and the North Carolina militia. Here is another monument, same place. This is dedicated by Teddy Roosevelt in 1903. And the interesting thing is, again, this is very much talked about as the first battle of the American Revolution. But if you look closely at those who were involved in it, many of the courthouse ring people became Whigs, became people who rebelled from England, because if you get rid of England, that puts them in charge. And many of the regulators, not Herman, but many of the regulators, they're enemies of the courthouse rings, so they sided with the British. And they were actually on the British side. So is this the first battle of the American Revolution? Well, you decide. So that's kind of where I'm going to wrap it up. We would go to Pennsylvania next, and I do have a lovely picture. There we go. But that's time-wise, I think I'm about out of time. So any thoughts, comments, questions? Most welcome. Yes, sir.
Lots of fun stuff to wade into here. So her husband has this conversion experience. He's a new light, right? And he writes about there needs to be a change, a reform of these courthouse procedures, and hopefully, ultimately, those people who would run these courthouses would have the same kind of new light that he does. But at the same time, he's out there trying to make money.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he's out there he first was out there as the representative of a group of investors.
Mm-hmm.
So how does he reconcile the fact that he's complaining about these folks making
Right. Well, as he would see it, I think, he's not exploiting anyone per se, as he would see it. He is simply taking advantage of the fact that today the land is cheap, tomorrow it won't be. So that's kind of my short answer. I have the same question, of course, and it's a good one, but he was very much a product of his environment, and that's what everybody was doing. And so as long as you weren't intentionally trying to screw someone out of their money, I think he would be okay with it. If it's just a natural flow of the market value of the land, then he would justify it that way. One of the processes that he was a big advocate of was that when you bring over indentured servants, he opposed slavery. Excuse me. He opposed slavery because he couldn't really argue for it on its own merits, or anti-slavery on its own merits. But he said, if you bring indentured servants, my voice is going out, then when they're done with their indenture, they can acquire land and bring more indentures and stay out of slavery altogether. So that was kind of his vision of what North Carolina should be. So, good question. That's my best answer. So, yes.
Doug, what was the reason that you got read out of the Quaker meeting?
This is something, sorry, and I forgot my cough drops. This is something that hermenologists are unclear on. There's a woman who thinks it was a gender issue, but what? Oh, excellent. Thank you. Usually I'm the one handing these things out. What I think it was this was during a time when the Quakers were trying to be seen as a legit institution that isn't going to oppose British rule. They're not going to oppose Anglicanism, but they want to carve out their own space, and they want to be protected by the British. So they don't want to make too many waves. And Herman's coming along with this kind of rhetoric, and it's just too much for him. That's what I suspect. But it's a good question. We're not sure. It's something we still argue about.
He sort of rocked the boat too much.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was he read out in Pennsylvania or
In North Carolina.
in North Carolina?
Yeah. Yeah, he got disowned, is the term. He and his wife both got disowned. Yeah. But in Pennsylvania, he kept preaching, had a following, but he was independent, I guess you'd call him at that point. So
An evangelical.
there you go, evangelical. Anything else? Yeah, Sarah.
I don't want to tax your voice too much, but
It'll be back.
you refer to him as Herman throughout, which is a little unusual. Is that
Yeah, I know. I do now, yeah. After several years of living with Herman and hermenologists, yeah, I suppose it is unusual. It just doesn't feel right to me to say husband this, husband that. It just doesn't seem right. He's kind of a friend of mine now. So I know that's not probably the best history. I should stay objective, but
when Stephen Oakes wrote his biography of Claire Martin, he got into a lot of trouble calling her Clara throughout.
oh, really?
That diminished her was the criticism.
I see. Well, I'll brace myself.
Of course, it's different. Won't a man writing on a woman then.
Well, good point. Yeah. Jay?
This This is a question that is, how do you rise to a certain challenge of a writer? So you're trying to describe a frontier in North Carolina where there are all sorts of strange things going on, things that'll seem strange to the modern American sensibility. You've got all these sort of drifters, escaped slaves, probably mixed blood offspring of Native Americans and fur traders who come in and out of different worlds. And you have various conditions of freedom and imprisonment and slavery, whether it be debtor's prison or outright slavery or the end of indentured servitude. All this stuff is really hard to describe for a modern American audience. So for you as a writer,
You just did a pretty good job, right?
so for you as a writer, how do you do that? I mean, what's your strategy to try to describe all these very strange things at once?
Yeah. I think what I'm doing so far, and I've still got quite a bit of text to write before I have a book of this stuff. I've got a couple chapters and a draft of another. I need to stay focused on just Herman's world, and how do you describe all these different things? Yeah, it's always a problem, as you know, past as a foreign country kind of thing. How do you relate it? And I guess it's just the craft of writing. You just got to kind of work it and have readers, you know, to tell you whether or not you're doing it. You're making sense to them. But for me, as my wife will well attest to you, I got to stay focused and try to keep my focus fairly narrow, because once I start getting out into trying to describe everything, you know, thick description, I'm a goner. So, yes.
Being the evangelist that he was, why was it that Herman was so pro separation of church and state?
Well, because he felt that, I think it was as much separation of church and state, I think it was just as much having authority. If you had one authority, it's plenty. You don't need two, and you don't need them combined. He was a radical Democrat, small d, and his description of what kind of voting process should exist was way more radical than anything proposed at the time. He felt that, I don't have time to go into all the detail. I'm going to talk a little bit about it next week. But, sorry, I still got this one. He wanted everybody to know personally who you're voting for. You don't vote for someone just because they say they're something. No, you have to know. And the only way you can do that is if you vote in small blocks. And then whoever's elected from this small block goes to the next level. And then all those people get to know each other. And then they elect themselves to the next level. But for him, it was an upside-down pyramid kind of thing. It was the producers that had the ultimate power. Or as he put it, I thought I had the line on here, maybe I do later. The producers are the goose that lays the golden egg daily. And rogues are going to try to feed off of them. That's kind of how he saw it. And authority figures are rogues. And so we don't need more. We need less. Yeah.
So is he a believer in having property in order to be able to vote?
I have not come across a place in his writing where he is specific about that. I think it would be safe to say, however, that if you were not an indentured servant, a recent arrival indentured servant, you would have property. When your indenture's over, you're given property. And so everybody has property. Kind of a bit Jefferson, more Jeffersonian than Jefferson. So, yeah. Anything else? Oh, yeah, Vin.
You know, there's a big difference between what Whitefield preached and what the Quakers held. What was the nature of his sort of final religious belief?
Well, it was very political. And actually, I'm glad you asked that, because there was one other thing I wanted to show. When Herman talked about religion, it was all deep metaphor. And this is a pamphlet he published, 1789, 14 sermons on the character of Jacob's 14 sons. And just take a quick look at it here. Here are the 14 sons. To Reuben from Genesis chapter 49, verse 3 and 4, Reuben, his firstborn, or men in a state of nature. To Simon and Levi, two brother societies, the Presbyterians and Independents. And so you go on down the list, and every one of these is a metaphor. He assigns what it means in the world now to this biblical text.
Chief justices, servants, adders, and generations of life.
Exactly. To Benjamin from down here, number 11, privateering companies or crews, letters of marque, etc., called wolves. So, yeah, it's fascinating, and I'm still working my way through some things here. Well, I think I put an image on here. At the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, they have one of Herman's original sermon books, and this is it. So we have an actual sermon book that's written by Herman. He had a journal as well, but it's lost. It'd be lovely to have it turn up in someone's attic, but I don't know. But his
handwriting is almost readable
yeah, it's not bad.
compared to some.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, that's the thing with doing history this old. It's mostly written. Well, that's the wonderful thing that, you know, he bothered to have his writing published. Oops. So, and all of his writing is, as you can see there, Philadelphia, printed for the author. They're all printed for the author in Philadelphia. And he's got one of my co-proposals when I send out a book proposal to a couple of publishers. I don't really have enough of a book to sell it yet, but my co-proposal was, let me edit a collection of Herman's writings. I don't know, we'll see. So, anything else? Well, if not, thanks a lot for coming. I appreciate it. Good crowd. Thank you.